Children, let's know more about icebergs. An iceberg is a large piece of freshwater ice that has broken off a glacier or an ice shelf and floats freely in open salt water. Icebergs, sizes and shapes and their types we are going to discuss now, children. Observe the picture, children. You have large, medium, small and very small called as growler. Observe the iceberg size classification table, children. You have different size categories there. That is growler, bergibit, small, medium, large and very large. The height of the iceberg is given both in feet and meters, and its length is also given in feet and meters. Please observe the table and understand clearly, children. Icebergs are grouped under two different shapes, children. That is tabular and non-tabular. A tabular iceberg is an iceberg with steep sides and flat top having a length to height ratio greater than 5:1. Many show horizontal banding also. Next, non-tabular describes all icebergs that are not tabular shape as described above. This category is further subdivided to include the specific shapes also, children. We will discuss now. If no other description applies, then the iceberg is simply referred to as a non-tabular. Non-tabular iceberg shape classification, children. Dome, an iceberg with a rounded top. Blocky, an iceberg with a flat top and steep vertical sides. Pinnacle, an iceberg with one or more spires. The meaning of spires is, children, a tapering, conical or pyramidal structure. Wedge, an iceberg having a steep vertical side on one end and sloping on the other. Dry dock, an iceberg that has eroded so a slot or channel is formed. Iceberg B15 was the largest iceberg, children. Now presently A68 is the world's largest iceberg. Do you know, children, why these glaciers are melting and the icebergs are breaking up from the ice shelves? Because of global warming. When these glaciers and icebergs melt, children, automatically the sea level increases. Once the sea level increases, the coastal areas would be flooded. And in the long run, there would be a big threat to plant and animal life. Many plants and animals also will get extinct. Watch this video, children, to know how the world's largest iceberg, A68, broke up from Antarctica. Children, now let's learn about ocean currents. Ocean currents can be defined as the movement of ocean water from one place to another, either horizontally or vertically, children. Types of ocean currents: temperature based, cold and warm. Now understand, children, what are warm currents and cold currents. Warm currents flow away from the equator and towards the poles. Cold currents flow towards the equator from the poles. Ocean currents are of two types, children: surface currents and deep water currents. Surface currents are formed due to the rotation of the earth, winds, water density differences. Warm water currents and cold water currents affect weather and climate in different ways, children. Regions near warm water currents are often warmer and wetter than the regions near cold water currents. Children, let's see an example how ocean currents affect the climate of a place. For example, the Labrador current is cold and cools the environment of Newfoundland. Newfoundland is in Canada, children. The Gulf Stream is a warm and moderates the winters of Europe. Children, watch this video to understand about ocean currents.
We hear about strange things from distant places being washed up on our shores all the time. But how do they get there? Ocean currents are the movements of surface water in the oceans. Their direction is influenced by many factors, including the rotation of the Earth, the size and shapes of the continents, the prevailing winds, and even water density. Ocean currents caused by prevailing winds are called drift currents. In the northern hemisphere, the circulation of the oceans is clockwise, and in the southern hemisphere, the currents are anti-clockwise. Currents originating from the polar regions carry cold water. There's the California current, the Peru or Humboldt current, the Labrador, Canaries, Benguela, the Antarctic circumpolar currents, and the Oyashio. Currents originating from the equatorial regions carry warm water. There's the Gulf Stream and North Atlantic Drift, the Brazil current, the North and South Equatorial currents, and the Kuroshio. So perhaps it's not so surprising that many of the items that are washed ashore originate from far-off places, thousands of miles away.
Do you know, children, what are planktons? Small microscopic algae or animals that float in water. They cannot move on their own. They rely on the ocean currents, children, to carry them. Food for many organisms. So fishing grounds are located where cold and warm currents meet, children. The convergence zone of cold and warm currents bring a lot of plankton, which are food for fishes. As a result, thousands of fishes thrive. So fishing grounds are located in these convergence zones, making it an active economic zone, children. The Dogger Bank of North Sea and Grand Bank of Atlantic Ocean are the two most important fishing grounds of the world. Children, now let's learn about corals. Corals are animals, children, not plants. Note that, right? There are two kinds of corals, soft corals and hard corals. Hard corals build reefs, children. They are made up of coral polyps, children, which look like upside down jellyfish. These coral polyps are found in the warm ocean currents, children. Coral reefs are formed, children, by the skeletons of tiny coral polyps, children. They secrete calcium carbonate. Like this, for many million years, the coral polyps die and grow one above the other, and reefs or islands are formed, children. Good example is the Great Barrier Reef of Australia and Lakshadweep Islands of India. So this video, children, to know how a coral island is formed from a coral reef.
Coral islands are formed by coral reefs, which are limestone formations composed of tiny sea organisms and their remains. A coral reef may grow around a sinking volcanic island. Some volcanic islands sink because of a sinking of the ocean floor. As the island sinks, the coral reef continues to grow upward and forms a ring-like barrier reef. After the island has submerged, only a circular reef called an atoll remains.
This is the Great Barrier Reef of Australia, children. The Great Barrier Reef is the largest coral reef in the world, children. The coral reef is located off the northeast coast of Australia and stretches to a length of 2,900 kilometers. Children, observe this video to know about the Great Barrier Reef.
We know that corals have been around for hundreds of millions of years. And across that time scale, we also know that the position of the continents on our planet has changed. All of these environmental conditions that I've mentioned before, light, salinity, nutrients, temperature, are all influenced by ocean currents and water depth. So this means that over time, where reefs occur has changed. And in fact, some of the reefs that were living under the ocean millions of years ago now occur on land, such as those examples I showed you from the Pilbara region in Western Australia. Another thing to keep in mind is that the height of the ocean also changes over time. And in fact, about 20,000 years ago, the sea was 130 meters lower than it is today. You can see this fluctuating height of sea level over time in this graph here. On the x-axis we have time in thousands of years before present, and on the y-axis we have the height of the sea. 0 here means that the sea is at the same height as it is today. About 20,000 years ago, we see that sea levels were much lower than they were today. And if you think about that, that means that the position of reefs is likely to have changed over time. So areas that are underwater now would have been emerged or out of the water 20,000 years ago. So scientists have done a lot of study of the Great Barrier Reef and what the history of the Great Barrier Reef has been over time. And that's what you're looking at in these images here. We're showing areas of dry land and how that's changed over the past 20,000 years as sea level has changed. So 20,000 years ago, when sea levels were around 135 meters lower than today, most of the Great Barrier Reef was actually dry land. When sea levels were 40 meters lower than they were today, you can still see there would have been areas of coral reef in these white areas where it was ocean, but also the position of the coastline is moved much further out than it is currently. So you can see over time the position of the Great Barrier Reef has changed as the sea levels has moved up and down. And in fact, the Great Barrier Reef as it exists today is approximately 6,000 years old, because that's the period over which sea level has been relatively stable in our recent history. So we can actually see these ancient platforms of reef during these periods of different sea level being actually preserved on the ocean floor. These are some images from some underwater scans which are showing us the position of the substratum deep under the reef as it is today. And this is from Hydrographer's Passage near the southern part of the Great Barrier Reef. You can see that these distinct reef platforms showing evidence of where sea level was stabilized over the history of the reef. So that history of sea level change remains preserved on the ocean floor.
Children, we have discussed earlier that Lakshadweep Islands are formed by the coral reefs. There are 36 coral islands that constitute Lakshadweep Islands. Only 10 are inhabited. What is the meaning of inhabited, children? Where people live. And only 6 have been opened for tourism. The total land area is around 32 square kilometers. These islands formed of coral deposits are called atolls. Atolls are circular or horseshoe-shaped coral reefs that you have seen in the video earlier.